this video, we're going to talk a little bit about how to select allowance items. We're then going to discuss redistribution, selecting specifications, and selecting timeline items. Now, to begin, we're here in the estimate costings, and I've just chosen a particular category here, appliances, as an example. And the first thing we want to do is talk a little bit about the allowance items, which I can designate by clicking this A button here. Now, essentially what this does is really three things. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to bring this item and other allowance items to a separate area of the quote letter, really just to highlight which areas have been designated allowance items. And we'll see that in more detail in another video. The second thing it's going to do is it's going to toggle on redistribution, which I'll go through in a moment. And the third and final thing that this A button does is it actually tags these items on the job management side. So really, we're just trying to make it as easy as possible later on to see which items you potentially have to do change orders for, depending on if they've gone over or under, or however you might be handling those. However, from there, we do want to talk a little bit about what is redistribution. And in its most basic sense, what redistribution is, and specifically here with the C, is we're essentially taking the markup that we normally applied to this item, and we're essentially redistributing it, in the case of the C, to other items in the category. Now, part of the reason why we do that is when we show this allowance item on the quote letter, we don't want to show it necessarily inclusive of markup. So really, we don't want your client to look at that and assume that they have $2,000 to spend when really 300 of that potentially is markup. So while you still want to make the same amount of money, we need the redistribution to essentially redistribute the money in order that we can present that item to the client as a clear and transparent allowance item while still retaining the amount of markup that you were looking to achieve. So to explain this further, I have a little slide here. And again, we see that we have essentially three options, and I'll go through these in Buildxact in a moment. However, we can choose to turn off redistribution. We have category redistribution, which is our default setting, and we also have estimate-wide distribution. So to begin, no redistribution is exactly that. It really just means that the markup is retained on each of the items. However, category redistribution is going to take up that with a markup that be normally applied to, say, this item, and it's going to redistribute it to other items in the category which are not allowance items. Further to that, and a common situation, is if you have all of the items in a particular category have the C button turned on, the category redistribution, then what Buildxact is actually going to do is treat that as estimate-wide redistribution. And that's just to say, because it can't essentially put markup onto other items in the category, it's going to take all the markup and it's going to distribute it across other items in your estimate. The third and final option is estimate-wide redistribution. And the idea here is quite simple, that if you have estimate-wide redistribution on an item, then it's going to take the markup that we normally apply to it, and in this case, it's going to apply it across all items into the estimate. So here is an example. You can see that this item, and this item, and this item have redistribution, so that markup will be applied onto the other items which do not have redistribution turned on. Now again, we can change how the redistribution works by clicking this little C button, so we can toggle it again, once for estimate wide, once again to turn it off, and once more to simply turn that back on. So again, you really do have control over how the redistribution works in Buildxact. Now, related to the redistribution and markup in general, I want to quickly highlight this quote total button here. Because when I click this is essentially going to give you just the breakdown of how the cost has been derived. So here again, we have our allowance item turned on and we have the category-wide distribution. So here's our estimated cost. You can see there's no markup at all. Then we have our costs, then our tax, then basically our quote total. Whereas if we go to another item on our list here, this one is an example, you're going to see that this is the markup that's directly applied to it. And again, we have a separate video that goes through markup in more detail, but you can also see the redistributions. And in there, you can see essentially the category and the estimate-wide redistributions and how much money has been reallocated to that item because of the said redistribution. Of course, then we have our total, the tax, and then we have the quote total at the very end there. So again, we're really doing quite a bit to allow you to very easily control how you can create and how you can show the cost while still retaining the markup. And again, you have transparency over that at all times by clicking on this button here. However, moving on, we have this little S button. And this is one of a few different ways that we can actually build our specifications, which we have a separate video on, which we'll go through later on. But the idea here is, as you're working through your estimate costings, if you want that item to be on your specifications, then you can actually go ahead and give that a click, and that will then pull the category and the item into your specifications, which again we'll view later on. And of course, the fourth and final button is the T button here. So same idea as if we give this button a click, then what this does is this will then pull that item as well as the category into our job schedule. Now, the job schedule is on the job management side, and again, we have a separate video to talk about how to create the job and the job schedule in general, but the idea here is, again, really the same, that as you're working through your estimate costings, as long as the item has a dollar value, you may want to begin to essentially designate that item to be on your schedule, so later on when you get to building and managing your schedule, that information can be essentially pre-filled. And while there is a variety of different ways to build the schedule, this is a really handy tool for many people. While we're here, it's also quickly noting that you can copy items as well. So again, just as a quick note there, if you need to copy an item, you have that ability very easily. And for us today, that covers our allowance, redistribution, selecting specifications, and timeline items.